The gunshot that rang through the Silver Creek Town Hall on that sweltering August afternoon in 1876 came from Adelaide Morgan's Derringer, and it sent the mayor's prized mirror shattering into 1,000 glittering pieces across the floorboards. Adelaide stood in the doorway of the emergency council meeting, smoke still curling from the tiny pistol in her gloved hand, her green eyes blazing with a fury that made even the bravest men in the room take a step back. She had not aimed at anyone, just at that gaudy mirror that reflected the faces of 12 pompous council members who had been discussing her fate as though she were nothing more than a stray dog to be run out of town. Her chestnut hair had come loose from its pins during her ride into town, wild curls framing a face flushed with anger and summer heat. "You want to expel me?" Her voice cut through the stunned silence like a whip crack. "For being bold? For speaking my mind? For daring to suggest that women might have valuable opinions about how this town is run?" Councillor Bartholomew Hayes, a portly man with mutton chop whiskers and a permanent sneer, recovered first. "Miss Morgan, you have disrupted council meetings, contradicted your betters in public forums, and worst of all, you have been teaching dangerous ideas to the women of this town. You are a corrupting influence, and we will not tolerate it." "Dangerous ideas," Adelaide repeated, her laugh sharp and bitter. "Like the idea that a woman might own property in her own name? Like the idea that a widow should not have to surrender her late husband's business to his brother simply because she lacks a male relation to vouch for her? Like the idea that a woman's testimony in court should carry the same weight as a man's?" "Precisely those kinds of ideas," Hayes shot back. "You are undermining the natural order of things, Miss Morgan. You have until sundown tomorrow to pack your belongings and leave Silver Creek. If you refuse, we will have the sheriff escort you to the county line." The other council members nodded their agreement, their faces set in hard lines of masculine certainty. Adelaide felt her heart hammering against her ribs, felt the hot sting of furious tears threatening to spill, but she would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her cry. She had built a life here in Silver Creek over the past 2 years, had opened a small bookshop that doubled as an informal lending library, had made friends and found purpose. The thought of losing it all because she had dared to speak up made her want to scream. She was about to unleash another torrent of words when the door behind her swung open with such force that it banged against the wall. A tall figure stepped past her into the room, and Adelaide caught the scent of leather and sage and honest sweat. She recognized him immediately, though they had never formally spoken. Everyone in Silver Creek knew Caleb Brennan, the quiet cowboy who ran a small ranch on the outskirts of town with his younger brother. He was perhaps 26 or 27, lean and weathered from years under the unforgiving Colorado sun, with dark hair that needed cutting and gray eyes that seemed to see straight through pretense and lies. "I heard what you just said to Miss Morgan," Caleb said, his voice low and steady, but with an edge of steel that made several council members shift uncomfortably. "And I am here to tell you that if Adelaide Morgan leaves this town, I leave with her." The silence that followed was absolute. Adelaide stared at him, her lips parting in shock. Caleb Brennan was one of the most respected men in Silver Creek, known for his honesty, his skill with horses, and his willingness to help neighbors in need. He kept to himself mostly, but when he spoke, people listened. His departure would be a significant loss to the community, and everyone in that room knew it. Hayes recovered first, sputtering. "Mr. Brennan, surely you cannot mean that. You have a ranch, responsibilities, a brother who depends on you." "My brother is 19 years old and perfectly capable of running the ranch," Caleb replied, his gaze never wavering from the council. "As for my responsibilities, I take them seriously. One of those responsibilities is standing up when I see injustice being done. Miss Morgan has done nothing wrong except speak uncomfortable truths that you gentlemen do not want to hear. If that is grounds for expulsion from this town, then Silver Creek is not a place I want to call home." Adelaide found her voice, though it came out shakier than she would have liked. "Mr. Brennan, you do not have to do this. You do not even know me." He turned to look at her then, and something in his gray eyes made her breath catch. "I know enough. he said quietly. I know that you lent my brother books when he wanted to improve his reading. I know that you helped organize supplies for the Miller family when their barn burned down. I know that you have more courage in your little finger than most men in this room have in their entire bodies. And I know that what they are doing to you is wrong. She felt heat rising to her cheeks that had nothing to do with anger or the summer temperature. No one had ever defended her like this, had ever put themselves on the line for her sake. Her father had died when she was 17, and her mother had passed the following year, leaving Adelaide alone in the world at 18 with nothing but a small inheritance and a fierce determination to make her own way. She had chosen Silver Creek because it was a growing town with opportunities, because she had hoped to find a place where she could build something meaningful. And now this man, this stranger who was not quite a stranger, was willing to sacrifice his home for her. Counselor Thomas Webb, who owned the general store and had always seemed more reasonable than Hayes, cleared his throat. Mr. Brennan, perhaps we have been hasty. Miss Morgan's actions, while unconventional, have not been illegal. Unconventional, Hayes spat. She is a menace to decent society. She fills women's heads with nonsense about rights and equality. Next thing you know, they will be demanding the vote. And would that be such a terrible thing? Caleb asked, his tone mild but his eyes hard. My mother could outshoot, outride, and outsmart most men I have ever known. She ran our family ranch for 10 years after my father died, kept it profitable through droughts and harsh winters. Tell me, Counselor Hayes, what makes you inherently more qualified to have a say in how this town is run than a woman like that? Hayes's face turned an alarming shade of purple. This is outrageous. We will not be lectured by some ranch hand who smells of horse dung. Caleb's jaw tightened, but his voice remained calm. Then I guess we understand each other. Miss Morgan, if you will allow me, I will help you pack your things. We can be gone by morning. Adelaide's mind raced. She did not want to leave Silver Creek, but more than that, she could not bear the thought of Caleb Brennan sacrificing everything he had built because of her. An idea struck her, reckless and bold. Exactly the kind of thing that had gotten her into this mess in the first place. Wait, she said, stepping forward. Counselor Webb, you said my actions have not been illegal. Is there any actual law or town ordinance that gives you the authority to expel me? Webb shifted uncomfortably and glanced at the other council members. Well, no, not precisely, but the council has broad discretionary powers to maintain public order and morality. Discretionary powers, Adelaide repeated, which means you can choose to exercise them or not. Mr. Brennan has made it clear that expelling me will cost this town a valuable member of the community. I wonder how many others share his view. How many of the women I have befriended? How many of the families I have helped? She was taking a gamble, but she had nothing left to lose. I propose a compromise. I will moderate my public statements, will not disrupt any more council meetings. In return, I stay in Silver Creek and continue to run my bookshop. No more threats of expulsion. Hayes started to object, but Webb held up a hand. The lady makes a fair point, and losing Mr. Brennan would be a significant blow. We have already lost too many good people to the newer settlements out west. Perhaps we can afford to be more tolerant of differences of opinion. The debate that followed was heated, with Hayes and his closest allies arguing vehemently against any compromise. But Webb was more influential than Adelaide had realized, and several other council members were clearly swayed by the prospect of losing Caleb Brennan. Finally, after nearly an hour of arguing, a vote was called. 7 council members voted to allow Adelaide to stay, 5 voted for expulsion. It was not a ringing endorsement, but it was enough. Adelaide felt her knees go weak with relief. Caleb's hand touched her elbow, steadying her, and the warmth of that simple contact sent a shiver through her despite the heat. Thank you, she whispered, as they left the town hall together, stepping out into the dusty street where the late afternoon sun painted everything gold and amber. Thank you for what you did in there. I cannot even begin to express my gratitude. No thanks needed, Caleb said, settling his hat back on his head. It was the right thing to do. They stood there awkwardly for a moment, and Adelaide was acutely aware that they were being watched from windows and doorways all along the street. News of the confrontation would be all over town by supper time. Would you allow me to buy you dinner? She asked impulsively. It is the least I can do after you risked so much for me." Something that might have been a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Miss Morgan, it would not be proper for an unmarried lady to buy dinner for a man, but if you would not mind the company, I would be honored to buy you dinner." Adelaide felt an answering smile spreading across her own face. "Mr. Brennan, I have just been nearly expelled from town for being improper. I think that ship has sailed, but I accept your invitation." They walked together to the Silver Creek Hotel, which had a small dining room that served decent food. Adelaide was intensely conscious of every eye that followed them, every whispered conversation that stopped as they passed. Let them talk, she thought, with a defiance that was becoming familiar. She had already been branded a troublemaker. She might as well enjoy herself. Over plates of beef stew and fresh bread they began to talk, tentatively at first, and then with growing ease. Caleb told her about his ranch, about the 30 head of cattle he and his brother raised, about his plans to expand into horse breeding. His mother had died 3 years ago, he said, and his father had passed when Caleb was just 15, leaving him to care for his younger brother and keep the ranch running. It was hard, he admitted, his fingers tracing patterns in the condensation on his water glass. "I was just a boy myself, barely knew what I was doing. But Mama had taught me well, and we had good neighbors who helped when they could. We made it through." Adelaide shared her own story about growing up in St. Louis, about losing both parents within a year and deciding she needed a fresh start far from the memories and the pitying looks. "I had enough money to buy the bookshop building and stock it with inventory," she said. "It does not make me rich, but it makes me happy. Or it did, until the council decided I was a threat to civilized society." "You challenge them," Caleb said, meeting her eyes across the table. "Powerful men do not like being challenged, especially not by women. It makes them feel small." "Is that what I do to you?" Adelaide asked, surprising herself with her boldness. "Make you feel small?" His gray eyes held hers, and she saw warmth there, and something that might have been admiration. "No, Miss Morgan. You make me feel like the world might be bigger and more interesting than I thought it was." They talked until the dining room emptied, and the proprietor began giving them pointed looks. When they finally stepped back out into the street, the sun had set, and stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Caleb walked her back to the small apartment above her bookshop, their footsteps echoing in the quiet evening. "May I call on you?" he asked when they reached her door. "Properly, I mean, if you would not object." Adelaide felt her heart do a strange flip in her chest. "I would not object at all, Mr. Brennan." "Caleb," he said, "if we are going to be courting, you should call me Caleb." "Adelaide," she replied, offering him her hand. He took it gently, his calloused fingers warm against hers, and for a moment they simply stood there, connected in the darkness. Over the following weeks, Caleb became a regular presence in Adelaide's life. He would ride into town 2 or 3 times a week, always finding excuses to stop by the bookshop. Sometimes he would bring her fresh vegetables from his garden or wildflowers he had gathered on the range. Sometimes he would just sit in one of the worn armchairs she kept for customers and read while she worked, his quiet presence somehow making everything feel right. They took walks together in the evenings, always properly chaperoned by whoever Adelaide could convince to accompany them, though the chaperones often fell discreetly behind, giving them space to talk. They discovered they shared a love of books, though Caleb's reading had been limited by circumstance and time. Adelaide began lending him novels and poetry collections, delighting in his thoughtful observations when he returned them. "You see things differently than most people," she told him one evening as they walked along the creek that gave the town its name, her friend Sarah trailing a respectful distance behind. "You think about what you read, really think about it." "I never had much formal schooling," Caleb said, watching the water slide over smooth stones. "But Mama always said that a person who can read can educate themselves if they are willing to put in the work. She made sure both my brother and I learned our letters, even when things were hard." "She sounds like she was a remarkable woman." "She was," Caleb agreed. his voice soft with memory. "She would have liked you. You remind me of her sometimes, the way you refuse to back down from what you believe is right." They had been courting for about 6 weeks when Hayes and his allies on the council made their second attempt to drive Adelaide out of town. This time, they were more subtle, passing an ordinance that required all business owners to post a hefty bond to ensure compliance with town regulations. The amount they set was clearly calculated to be more than Adelaide could afford, while being low enough that established merchants like Webb could pay it easily. Adelaide learned about the new requirement when Sheriff Tom Granger came by the bookshop, looking uncomfortable and apologetic. Granger was a decent man who had always treated her fairly, and he clearly hated being used as Hayes's messenger. "I am sorry, Miss Morgan," he said, refusing to meet her eyes, "but if you cannot post the bond within 2 weeks, I will have to close your shop. Council's orders." After he left, Adelaide sank into one of her armchairs and let herself cry for the first time since the confrontation in the town hall. She had been so careful, had moderated her public statements just as she had promised, had not caused any trouble at all. But Hayes and his cronies were not going to let her be. They would keep finding new ways to push her out until they succeeded. She was still crying when Caleb arrived for his usual visit. He took one look at her tear-stained face and was beside her in an instant, his arm around her shoulders, his presence solid and comforting. "What happened?" he asked, and she told him, her words tumbling over each other in a rush of anger and despair. "I have some savings," she finished, "but not enough for their bond. They know that. They are counting on it. And even if I could scrape together the money, what is to stop them from passing another ordinance next month, and another after that? They will not rest until I am gone." Caleb was quiet for a long moment, his arms still around her, and Adelaide let herself lean into his warmth, drawing strength from his steady presence. When he finally spoke, his voice was thoughtful. "Marry me," he said. Adelaide jerked upright, staring at him in shock. "What?" "Marry me," Caleb repeated, meeting her eyes. "If you are my wife, you will not need to post a bond because the business will be in my name. Hayes cannot touch you then, not without going through me." "That is not a reason to get married," Adelaide protested, even as her heart raced at the thought. "Caleb, you cannot just offer to marry me because of some stupid town ordinance." "It is not just because of the ordinance," he said quietly. "Adelaide, I have been working up the courage to ask you for weeks now. I am not good with fancy words, but I know what I feel. I have never met anyone like you, anyone who makes me want to be better, to see more, to do more. These past weeks with you have been the happiest I have known since before Mama died. And yes, maybe I am asking now because of this new trouble, but I would have asked eventually anyway. I am just asking sooner." Adelaide felt fresh tears welling up. But these were different from the earlier ones. "Caleb, I care for you deeply, more than I thought possible in such a short time. But marriage is not something to rush into just because of external pressure. What if you regret it later? What if you wake up one day and realize you bound yourself to me for all the wrong reasons?" He reached out and gently wiped a tear from her cheek with his thumb. "Adelaide Morgan, I could no more regret marrying you than I could regret breathing. But if you need more time, if you're not ready, then we will find another way. I will loan you the money for the bond. I will stand up to the council again, whatever it takes." She looked into his gray eyes and saw nothing but sincerity and something deeper, something that made her breath catch. She thought about the past 6 weeks, about how natural it had felt to have him in her life, about how empty the days seemed when he was back at the ranch. She thought about his quiet strength, his kindness, his unwavering support, and she thought about how much she wanted to wake up beside him every morning for the rest of her life. "Yes," she said softly. "Yes, Caleb Brennan, I will marry you." The joy that spread across his face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. He pulled her into his arms, holding her close, and Adelaide felt something settle into place inside her, like a piece of herself she had not known was missing clicking home. They were married 3 days later in a simple ceremony at the small church on the edge of town. Caleb's brother Jack stood up as best man, grinning with barely contained excitement at gaining a sister. Sarah and two of Adelaide's other friends from town served as witnesses, their faces beaming. Reverend Matthews performed the ceremony with genuine warmth, clearly delighted to be marrying two people who so obviously cared for each other. Hayes and his allies were conspicuously absent, but Adelaide noticed that Webb and several other council members were there, along with many of the townspeople she had befriended over the past 2 years. When Caleb slipped the simple gold ring onto her finger and the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, the small church erupted in applause. "You may kiss your bride," Reverend Matthews said with a smile, and Caleb did, gentle and sweet and full of promise. The kiss sent warmth flooding through Adelaide's entire body, and when they pulled apart, she saw her own wonder reflected in Caleb's eyes. This was real. This was happening. She was married to this good, brave man who had stood up for her when no one else would. They held a small reception in the churchyard with food that their friends had brought and music from old Tom Wheeler's fiddle. Adelaide danced with her new husband under the open sky, feeling lighter and happier than she had in years. When Caleb looked down at her, his eyes full of tenderness, she knew with absolute certainty that she had made the right choice. "Thank you," she whispered as they swayed to the music. "For everything. For standing up for me, for believing in me, for loving me. Always," he promised, pulling her closer. "For as long as I live, Adelaide Brennan." The sound of her new name sent a thrill through her. Adelaide Brennan. It fit, she thought. It felt right. That evening, Caleb drove them out to the ranch in his wagon, Adelaide's belongings packed in the back along with boxes of books from her shop. She had arranged for Sarah to manage the bookshop during the day while Adelaide was at the ranch, with plans to come into town several times a week to help and keep the business running. The ranch house was modest but well built, a sturdy wooden structure with a wide porch and views of the mountains in the distance. Jack greeted them enthusiastically, clearly having prepared for their arrival by cleaning the house from top to bottom. He had even picked wildflowers and put them in a jar on the kitchen table. "Welcome home, Adelaide," he said, his young face earnest. "I am real happy Caleb married you. He has been different since he met you, happier. And I have been wanting a sister for a long time." Adelaide hugged him, touched by his genuine warmth. "Thank you, Jack. I am happy to be here." Jack tactfully made himself scarce after supper, saying he had work to finish in the barn that would keep him busy for a while. Adelaide helped Caleb clean up the dishes, the domestic simplicity of the task feeling strange and wonderful. This was her home now, her life. It was so different from everything she had imagined for herself, and yet it felt exactly right. When the dishes were done, Caleb took her hand and led her to the bedroom they would share. Adelaide felt her heart racing with a mixture of nervousness and anticipation. She had never been with a man before, had never even been properly kissed until today, but Caleb was patient and gentle, taking his time, making sure she felt safe and cherished. "We can wait," he murmured against her hair as he held her close. "There is no rush, Adelaide. We have all the time in the world." But Adelaide did not want to wait. She wanted this, wanted him, wanted to seal their union completely. She pulled back just far enough to look up at him, seeing her own desire reflected in his eyes. "I do not want to wait," she said softly. "I want to be your wife in every way." What followed was tender and sweet, and occasionally awkward, as first times often are, but it was theirs. Caleb made her feel beautiful and wanted, his hands and lips gentle as he explored her body, his whispered words of love a constant reassurance. When they finally came together completely, Adelaide felt tears slipping down her cheeks, overwhelmed by the intimacy and the trust and the deep sense of connection. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the darkness, Caleb's arms wrapped around her, her head resting on his chest where she could hear the steady beat of his heart. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness, It was the first time either of them had said the words out loud, though they had been implicit in everything they had done and said for weeks. She felt Caleb's arms tighten around her. "I love you too, Adelaide, more than I ever thought possible." They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other's warmth, and Adelaide dreamed of wildflowers, an endless sky, and a future that stretched out before them full of possibility. The next morning, Adelaide woke to find herself alone in bed, sunlight streaming through the window. She could hear voices outside, Caleb and Jack talking as they worked. She dressed quickly and went out to find them repairing a section of fence in the corral. Caleb looked up at her approach, and the smile that spread across his face made her stomach flutter. "Morning, wife," he said, the word clearly giving him pleasure. "Morning, husband," she replied, enjoying the way his eyes lit up. Over the following weeks, Adelaide settled into her new life as a rancher's wife. It was hard work, harder than running the bookshop had been, but she found she did not mind. There was something satisfying about the physical labor, about seeing tangible results from her efforts. She learned to cook more elaborate meals than she had bothered with when living alone, learned to mend clothes and manage a household. She helped with the ranch work too, discovering a knack for working with the horses that Caleb was beginning to breed. She still went into town 3 times a week to help at the bookshop, and those days reminded her of who she had been before Caleb, of the independent woman who had fought for her right to exist on her own terms. It was important to her to maintain that part of herself, and Caleb never questioned her need for it. About 2 months after the wedding, Hayes made his final attempt to cause trouble. He appeared at the bookshop one afternoon when Adelaide was there alone, his face flushed with drink and anger. "Thought you were so clever, did you not?" he sneered, swaying slightly. "Tricking Caleb Brennan into marrying you just to keep your precious shop?" Adelaide set down the book she had been cataloging and met his eyes steadily, refusing to show fear even though her heart was racing. "I did not trick anyone, Counselor Hayes. Caleb and I married because we love each other, something you clearly know nothing about." "Love," Hayes spat. "You are nothing but a conniving woman who uses her feminine wiles to manipulate good men. You should have been driven out of town when we had the chance." "But I was not," Adelaide said calmly, "and now I am married to one of the most respected men in this community, which means you have lost, Counselor. You tried to break me, tried to force me out, and you failed. Perhaps it is time you accepted that and moved on with your life." Hayes's face turned an alarming shade of red. He took a step toward her, and for a moment Adelaide thought he might actually strike her. But then the shop door opened and Caleb walked in, his eyes immediately assessing the situation. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, his voice deceptively mild as he moved to stand beside Adelaide. Hayes seemed to deflate, all the fight going out of him in the face of Caleb's quiet strength. "No problem," he muttered. "I was just leaving." After he stumbled out, Caleb pulled Adelaide into his arms, holding her tight. "Are you all right? Did he hurt you?" "I am fine," Adelaide assured him, though she was shaking slightly from the confrontation. "Just shaken. He was drunk and angry, but I do not think he would have actually hurt me." "I do not like the idea of him anywhere near you," Caleb said grimly. "If he ever threatens you again, I want to know about it immediately." Adelaide nodded against his chest, drawing comfort from his solid presence. "Thank you for coming when you did. How did you know I needed you?" "I did not," Caleb admitted. "I just finished my business early and wanted to see you. Lucky timing, I guess." Or maybe it was more than luck, Adelaide thought. Maybe it was the universe looking out for her, giving her exactly what she needed exactly when she needed it. Hayes did not bother them again after that. Whether he finally gave up or simply ran out of energy for the fight, Adelaide did not know and did not care. She was too busy living her life, loving her husband, and building something meaningful with him. As autumn turned to winter and winter to spring, Adelaide and Caleb's love deepened and grew. They worked side by side on the ranch, building their horse breeding operation into something profitable and respected. Adelaide continued to run her bookshop with Sarah's help, and gradually she began to notice that other women in town were becoming bolder, speaking up more in public forums, questioning decisions that affected them. She had planted seeds without even meaning to, and they were beginning to grow. In the spring of 1877, Adelaide discovered she was pregnant. She told Caleb one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and crimson. His reaction was everything she could have hoped for, joy and wonder, and a fierce protective tenderness that made her fall in love with him all over again. "We are going to have a baby," he kept repeating, as though saying it out loud would make it more real. "Adelaide, we are going to be parents." "Are you happy?" she asked, though she could see the answer in his face. "Happy does not even begin to cover it," he said, pulling her into his arms. "You have given me so much, Adelaide, more than I ever dreamed of having, and now this, a child of our own. I do not have words for what I am feeling." "Then just hold me," she whispered, and he did, and it was enough. The pregnancy was not easy. Adelaide suffered from terrible morning sickness for the first few months, and as she grew larger, the physical demands of ranch work became increasingly difficult. But Caleb and Jack were endlessly supportive, taking over her chores without complaint, making sure she rested and ate well. Sarah managed the bookshop almost entirely on her own during this time, visiting the ranch regularly to keep Adelaide updated and to bring her new books to read. In December of 1877, after a long and difficult labor, Adelaide gave birth to a healthy baby boy. They named him Daniel, after Caleb's father, and when Caleb held his son for the first time, Adelaide saw tears streaming down his face. "He is perfect," Caleb whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Adelaide, he is absolutely perfect." She smiled, exhausted, but happier than she had ever been. "He has your eyes." "And your stubbornness, I suspect," Caleb said with a watery laugh. "Heaven help us all." Motherhood changed Adelaide in ways she had not anticipated. She had always been fiercely independent, had always defined herself by her mind and her principles and her refusal to conform. But now she found a new dimension to herself, a fierce, protective love that was unlike anything she had known before. She marveled at Daniel's tiny fingers and toes, at the way he looked at her with complete trust, at the little noises he made as he nursed. Caleb was a wonderful father, patient and loving and deeply involved in every aspect of Daniel's care. Adelaide would often wake in the night to find him pacing the floor with their son, singing old cowboy songs in a low rumble that soothed both baby and mother. Jack was equally smitten with his nephew, constantly finding excuses to hold him and make silly faces that sent Daniel into fits of baby giggles. The ranch house that had once seemed so quiet and empty was now filled with life and love and the thousand small sounds of a growing family. When Daniel was about 6 months old, Adelaide returned to working at the bookshop part-time, bringing the baby with her in a basket. The women of Silver Creek cooed over him, and Adelaide found herself part of a community of mothers who shared advice and stories and support. Some of these women had been skeptical of her when she first arrived in town, but now they welcomed her warmly, and Adelaide realized that she had finally found the acceptance she had been seeking. One afternoon in the summer of 1878, as Adelaide was working in the bookshop with Daniel napping in his basket, Counselor Webb stopped by. Adelaide tensed, half expecting more trouble, but Webb's expression was friendly. "Miss Morgan, or rather, Mrs. Brennan," he said with a slight bow, "I wanted to let you know that the council has been discussing some new initiatives, and your name came up." Adelaide braced herself, but Webb continued with a smile. "Several of us, myself included, have been impressed by the positive impact your bookshop has had on this community. Literacy rates have improved, particularly among women and children. We would like to propose using some town funds to expand your lending library, perhaps even establish a proper school. We were hoping you might be willing to serve on a committee to oversee such a project." Adelaide stared at him in shock. "You want me on a committee? But Counselor Hayes—" "Hayes resigned from the council last month," Webb said. "He has moved to Denver to live with his daughter. Between you and me, I think his wife finally convinced him that his constant anger was bad for his health. With him gone, the rest of us have been able to think more clearly about what is best for Silver Creek, and we believe that includes giving you a voice in community decisions." Adelaide felt tears pricking at her eyes. This was what she had been fighting for all along, not just for herself, but for all the women in Silver Creek. The chance to participate, to contribute, to be heard. "I would be honored," she said softly. "Thank you, Counselor Webb." "The thanks should go to you, Mrs. Brennan," Webb replied. "You showed us that being bold is not the same as being wrong. That took courage, and it changed this town for the better." After Webb left, Adelaide picked up her sleeping son and held him close, breathing in his sweet baby scent. She thought about the girl she had been 2 years ago, angry and defiant and alone, facing down a hostile town council. She thought about Caleb standing up for her when no one else would, about the leap of faith they had both taken in choosing each other. And she thought about the future stretching out before them, full of possibility and hope. When she returned to the ranch that evening, Caleb was waiting on the porch, and the smile he gave her was brighter than the setting sun. She told him about Webb's visit, about the committee, and he swept her into his arms. Daniel squashed between them, all of them laughing with pure joy. "I am so proud of you," Caleb murmured against her hair. "You never gave up, never stopped fighting for what was right. And now look at what you have accomplished." "What we have accomplished," Adelaide corrected, pulling back to look at him. "None of this would have been possible without you, Caleb. You believed in me when I could not believe in myself. You stood beside me when it would have been easier to walk away. Everything good in my life traces back to that moment in the town hall when you said I could stay." "Or you would leave with me," Caleb reminded her with a grin. "Do not forget that part." "How could I?" Adelaide laughed. "It was the most romantic thing anyone has ever said to me." They stood there on the porch as the sun sank below the horizon, painting the sky in impossible colors, holding each other in their sun, and Adelaide felt a contentment so deep it almost frightened her. She had everything she had ever wanted and so much more than she had ever dared to dream of. The years that followed were good ones. Adelaide served on the education committee and helped establish a proper school for Silver Creek, one that welcomed both boys and girls and provided opportunities for adults to improve their literacy as well. She continued to run her bookshop, though as Daniel grew older and was joined by a daughter named Sarah in 1880 and another son named James in 1882, she spent more time at the ranch and less in town. Caleb's horse breeding operation thrived, earning a reputation throughout Colorado for producing strong, intelligent animals. Jack eventually married a sweet girl named Emma from a neighboring ranch, and they built a house on the far edge of the Brennan property, staying close to family while building their own life together. Adelaide never did get the right to vote in her lifetime. That would not come until long after, but she did see significant changes in Silver Creek's attitudes toward women. By 1885, 3 women were serving on various town committees, and several women owned businesses in their own names. The seeds Adelaide had planted with her boldness and Caleb's support had grown into something larger than either of them had anticipated. On a warm evening in August of 1886, exactly 10 years after that first confrontation in the town hall, Adelaide and Caleb sat on their porch watching their 3 children play in the yard. Daniel was nearly 9 now, all long limbs and curious questions, already showing signs of his mother's stubborn independence and his father's quiet strength. Sarah was 6, sweet-natured, but with a steely determination that Adelaide recognized all too well. And James was 4, fearless and adventurous, constantly giving his parents heart attacks with his climbing and exploring. "Did you ever imagine it would turn out like this?" Adelaide asked, leaning against Caleb's shoulder. 10 years ago, when you stood up for me in that town hall?" Caleb wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. "Honestly, I had no idea what would happen. I just knew I could not stand by and watch them drive you out. It would have been wrong, and I have never been good at staying quiet when I see something wrong happening." "Lucky for me," Adelaide said softly. "Lucky for both of us," Caleb corrected. "You changed my life, Adelaide. Before I met you, I was just going through the motions, working and surviving, but not really living. You showed me that there was more to life than just getting by. You challenged me to think differently, to be better, to stand up for what I believe in. Defending you in that town hall was not some noble sacrifice. It was the smartest, most selfish thing I have ever done, because it meant I got to keep you in my life." Adelaide turned to look at him. This man who had stood beside her through everything, who had loved her fiercely and completely for 10 years, who had given her everything she had never known she wanted. His dark hair was starting to show threads of silver at the temples now, and the lines around his eyes had deepened from years of squinting into the sun. But to her he was as handsome as the day she had first really seen him, striding into that town hall to defend her. "I love you," she said, the words as true and necessary as breathing. "I have loved you from the moment you walked through that door and said you would leave with me. I will love you until the day I die and beyond." "Adelaide Brennan," Caleb said, his gray eyes warm with emotion, "you are the best thing that ever happened to me, and I promise you, for as long as I live, I will never stop being grateful that you were bold enough to make those stuffy counselors angry, because if you had not, I might never have found the courage to talk to you." They kissed as the sun set over the Colorado mountains, their children's laughter floating up from the yard, the sounds of the ranch settling into evening peace all around them. It was a perfect moment, the kind that Adelaide knew she would remember forever, and she held on to it with both hands, grateful beyond words for the wild, unexpected journey that had brought her here. Because 10 years ago, a town council had wanted her expelled for being bold, and a cowboy had said she could stay or he would leave with her. And from that one moment of courage and defiance and unexpected connection, an entire life had grown, rich and full, and more beautiful than Adelaide had ever dared to imagine. As darkness fell and they called the children inside for supper, Adelaide took one last look at the stars beginning to appear in the vast Colorado sky. She thought about all the women who would come after her, who would benefit from the small changes she had helped bring about in Silver Creek. She thought about her daughter Sarah, growing up in a world where it was just a little bit easier to be bold, to speak up, to demand to be heard. And she thought about Caleb, her partner in every sense of the word, who had seen her at her most difficult moment and had chosen to stand beside her anyway, who had loved her not in spite of her boldness but because of it, who had built a life with her that was more than either of them could have created alone. Inside, the kitchen was warm and bright, filled with the chatter of children and the familiar rhythms of family life. Caleb caught her eye across the room and smiled, that private smile that was just for her, and Adelaide felt her heart swell with a love so vast it seemed impossible that one person could contain it. This was her life now, so different from anything she had imagined for herself as an angry young woman facing down a hostile town council. It was better than she had imagined, richer and fuller, and infinitely more rewarding. And it had all started with one simple, courageous act by a quiet cowboy who had seen injustice and had refused to let it stand. Years later, when Adelaide was an old woman and people asked her about the secret to a long and happy marriage, she would always say the same thing. Find someone who will stand beside you when the whole world is against you. Find someone who sees your boldness not as a flaw to be corrected, but as a strength to be celebrated. And when you find that person, hold on to them with everything you have, because that kind of love is rare and precious and worth fighting for. She would think of Caleb then, even though by that time he would have been gone for several years, his body finally giving out at the age of 78 after a life well lived. She would remember that first moment in the town hall, the sound of his voice saying she could stay, the way her world had shifted on its axis in that instant. She would remember every moment that had followed, the joys and challenges and ordinary magic of a shared life. But on this August evening in 1886, all of that was still ahead of them. Now they had 3 healthy children, a thriving ranch, a community that had learned to value Adelaide's contributions and each other. They had love and laughter and hard work and hope. They had everything that mattered. As Adelaide helped serve supper and listened to Daniel tell an elaborate story about a snake he had seen by the creek, as she watched Caleb cut up food for little James, and heard Sarah's infectious giggle at something her brother said, she felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over her. This was what happiness looked like, she thought. Not some grand, dramatic gesture, but these small, ordinary moments strung together like pearls on a string, creating something beautiful and enduring. After the children were in bed, Adelaide and Caleb returned to the porch, as was their habit on warm evenings. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, holding hands, watching the stars, simply being together. After 10 years of marriage, they did not always need words. Sometimes the silence between them said everything that needed to be said. "Do you ever regret it?" Adelaide asked eventually, breaking the peaceful quiet. "Marrying me so quickly, tying yourself to my troubles?" Caleb was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice was thoughtful. "I regret that it took Hayes being such a bastard for me to find the courage to approach you. I had been watching you for months before that town hall meeting, Adelaide. Every time you came to town, every time you spoke up at a public gathering, every time you refused to back down from what you believed was right, you fascinated me and you terrified me in equal measure. I wanted to talk to you, but I could not figure out how to approach someone like you, someone so much braver and smarter than I felt I was." Adelaide squeezed his hand, touched by the confession. "I noticed you too, you know. I thought you were handsome. And I liked the way you were gentle with the horses at the livery, but I never imagined you would be the one to stand up for me. Sometimes I think the universe puts people in our path exactly when we need them," Caleb said. "I needed someone to remind me that there was more to life than just work and survival. You needed someone who would stand beside you no matter what. We found each other at exactly the right moment." "Or you found me," Adelaide said with a smile. "Let us be honest about who did the rescuing in our relationship." "We rescued each other," Caleb insisted, pulling her closer. "You gave me purpose and passion and a reason to be brave. I gave you support and stability and a place to belong. That seems like a fair trade to me." They sat together until late into the night, talking and dreaming and planning for the future. They talked about expanding the ranch, about sending Daniel to college someday if he wanted to go, about the book Adelaide was thinking of writing about her experiences in Silver Creek. They talked about growing old together, about watching their children have children of their own, about all the years still stretching out before them full of possibility. And when they finally went inside to their bedroom, their lovemaking was tender and familiar. The passion of their early days mellowed into something deeper and more enduring. Afterward, as Adelaide lay in Caleb's arms listening to his heartbeat slow into the rhythm of sleep, she thought about how lucky she was. Because 10 years ago, she had been a young woman alone in the world fighting for her right to exist on her own terms. And now she was a wife, a mother, a valued member of her community, a woman who had helped change the world in small but meaningful ways. And none of it would have been possible without the cowboy who had walked into that town hall and said the words that changed both their lives forever. She would stay, and he would stay with her, and together they would build something beautiful. And they had. And it was good. The end came peacefully for both of them decades later, first Caleb in the winter of 1908 and then Adelaide the following spring, as though she had only been waiting to make sure all their affairs were in order before following him. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch, under a cottonwood tree that Caleb had planted the year Daniel was born. Their children and grandchildren gathered to mourn them, to celebrate them, to remember the love story that had shaped all their lives. Daniel, now in his 30s and running the ranch with his own sons, told the story of how his parents met, how his father had stood up to an entire town council for his mother's sake. Sarah, a teacher at the school her mother had helped establish, spoke of Adelaide's courage and determination. James, who had followed in his mother's footsteps and opened a publishing house in Denver, read from the memoir Adelaide had finally written late in her life. And as they shared their memories and their grief, as they honored the two people who had loved each other so completely and had built such a beautiful life together, they knew that Adelaide and Caleb's story would continue to be told for generations, a reminder that sometimes the boldest act is standing up for what is right, and sometimes the most romantic gesture is simply refusing to let someone face their battles alone. In Silver Creek, which had grown from a small frontier town into a thriving community, Adelaide and Caleb Brennan were remembered as pioneers not just of the land, but of a more just and equal society. The bookshop Adelaide had fought so hard to keep remained in operation for more than a century, eventually becoming a historic landmark. The school she had helped establish continued to educate generations of children, and the values she had fought for, the belief that every person regardless of gender deserved to be heard and respected, gradually became woven into the fabric of the community she had called home. But more than any of that, Adelaide and Caleb were remembered for their love story, for the proof that sometimes the right person appears at exactly the right moment, and that when courage and compassion meet, something extraordinary can be born. Their story became part of Silver Creek's folklore, told and retold to new generations as an example of what true partnership looks like, of what it means to stand beside someone through everything life throws at you. And on quiet evenings, when the sun sets over the Colorado mountains and paints the sky in impossible colors, some say you can still feel their presence on the ranch they built together. The echo of laughter, the whisper of old love songs, the sense of two souls who found each other against all odds and never let go. Because that is the thing about true love, the kind that Adelaide and Caleb shared. It does not end when life does. It continues on in the lives it touched, in the children and grandchildren who carry forward the legacy, in the stories that are told, and the lessons that are learned. It becomes part of the landscape itself, as enduring as the mountains and as constant as the stars. And so their story lives on, a testament to the power of courage, the strength of partnership, and the transformative force of a love that refused to be diminished by prejudice or convention or fear. A love that began when a town council wanted her expelled for being bold, and a cowboy said she could stay or he would leave with her. A love that changed everything.